Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Nev Fountain is an award-winning writer chiefly known for his work on the BBC sketch show Dead Ringers in both TV and radio incarnations. He's also contributed to many other programs, including Have I Got News for You and Newzoids. He is a principal gag writer for satirical magazine Private Eye and contributes to every issue. He first came to write for Doctor Who when he script-edited the BBC online story Death Comes to Time in 2001, and has gone on to write some of Big Finish's most popular audios, including The Kingmaker and Peri and the Piscon Paradox. His books include The Mervyn Stone Mysteries, The Fan Who Knew Too Much, and its sequel, Lies and Dolls, which was released in July. Nev talks with me about how he got his start writing radio comedy, the challenges of writing comedy even about very serious events, writing for various forms and media, leaving room to be surprised as you're writing, and more. Here's my conversation with Nev Fountain. Nev, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
It's lovely to be here.
So I start everyone with the same question. Were you a creative kid, or did you discover your creative side later on?
Oh, absolutely. From the moment I think I went to school, my brother died last year. Sadly, he was my younger brother. But we sat with each other a lot in the last months, and he remembered vividly the fact that I would write these epic stories in primary school, and the teachers would get me to read out each chapter. I wrote about a 10-page story, cribbed from, shamelessly stolen from Doctor Who. And I was about 7 years old at the time. So I was a bit of an oddity in school already, because I had the reading age of an 11-year-old when I was 6. So I was reading a lot and just writing stories. Yeah, I mean, as soon as I could think, really, in sentences.
Did anyone, respond to that like it was unusual, either in a good way or a bad way?
Some of my teachers were very encouraging. That's the good thing. My first teacher, Miss Murphy, in primary school was very encouraging. I mean, teachers are generally very encouraging. My teachers, Miss Corby in my upper school and Mrs. Johnson in my middle school, all very encouraging. My father was a lumberjack, and he often used to take the mickey out of my way of speaking, because, he was a blue-collar worker. And he used to recount stories of me speaking in a very kind of intellectual way. I had a huge mop of hair when I was little, and I was often mistaken for a girl. And he used to recount a story of me being about 5 years old, and one of Dad's mates going, "Oh, you've got a lovely little daughter." And me saying, "You're mistaken. I'm a boy." Or, "I'm afraid you're mistaken. I'm a boy." And this is from 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, Dad used to take the rip, but that's what dads do, really.
Frequently, yeah.
My dad was very proud of me, eventually. He always was proud of me. He just couldn't stop taking the mickey. We are a very humorous family. Some of us do it well, some of us don't.
So when did writing turn into, like, a real thing for you?
How do you mean real?
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it, isn't it? Like, when did it change into something that seemed like something you could do as a lifelong career thing?
I often was absolutely certain I was going to be a writer. The trick was trying to find something to earn money while I was writing. So ever since I was at university, I knew I was going to be a writer, I think even before then. And I was sending scripts off to all manner of places, comics, trying to write a children's story at one point, trying to write a script, trying to write a comic script. I used to send dozens of things off to 2000 AD, which is a British comic, quite famous in this country. That was from ages of 15 and 16. So from ages of 15 and 16 to 25, I was just trying to work my way into finding a day job that worked. I trained as a teacher, but it was so tiring. I never got a chance to do enough writing. I worked in Hamley's toy shop in London, which was less exhausting, and I was able to put on a couple of fringe plays, write and produce them myself and put them on in London in the small pub venues. But the trick was getting professional, and that was going to radio comedy, which was the only place I knew you could earn money. And the difficulty being is that they had meetings in Broadcasting House on a weekday, and then the following day you'd be writing and putting stuff into the producers. And it was just quite difficult on the schedule of being a shop worker to do that. And after going back into teaching, and that was being even worse for me, I finally ended up in a ticket agency after I got married, and I was able to define my own hours completely. So I swept Wednesdays and Thursdays completely free. And after that, it happened quite quickly. I started getting stuff on Radio 4, on their comedy sketch show, the satirical comedy sketch show Weekending. And that's when it all started. It didn't really stop after that. Other Radio 4 shows beckoned, and Radio 2 shows beckoned, and I wrote for those too. And then I went on to television, and that's where it started, really.
So you mentioned that your family was very funny. Is that where your interest in comedy came from, or did it get bolstered somewhere else?
I think my interest in comedy is from listening to radio and television. There was a very healthy comedy scene in the 80s. Just as people were inspired by Monty Python in the late 60s and 70s, I loved the Young Ones and Blackadder in the 80s. They were very much part of my formative years. I just think having a funny family was just being in my DNA. I was the least funny person in my family. My brother was very funny. My father was very funny. My grandfather was even funnier than both of those. A naturally funny family. I didn't actually use that in my work to start with, because satirical comedy is satirical comedy. It's a beast that you learn how to do. When I started writing plays and full scripts, I started to tap on my father and my brothers and my outlook on life a little bit more. So I'm not sure I used my family humor as much in the early days, but I do tap on it from time to time.
Yeah, those are good influences you mentioned. I mean, I remember Young Ones and Blackadder, certainly.
Oh yeah, we used to recite Blackadder verbatim. Young Ones was absolute appointment television for 12 weeks for the 2 series of 6. I remember when Neil got on to Top of the Pops, and I recorded it and watched it with my mates. Used to watch him doing his song on Top of the Pops for about 20, 30 times, because it was just a funny thing. And Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, obviously. My friend and I used to go camping in my front garden, and we used to be able to recite the first 3 pages of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, from memory. It's appreciation of words, I think, and that's where the words were clever. My dad was interested in words too, and my grandfather was interested in words as well, but from an uneducated point of view. They just enjoyed the structure of words. I don't want to be too pretentious about that, but yeah. You could have a conversation with them, and not a very serious conversation, but you could have a conversation with them.
Yeah, I think, I was not at all surprised to hear you mention The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I think that was really where I started to notice and appreciate wordplay. I think I read that when I was about 13. And it made such a huge impression because so much of that book is wordplay. And so, from there on, whenever I started to encounter somebody who could really do something fun with words, I noticed it a lot more. And then, of course, I discovered in backwards order P.G. Wodehouse. And as soon as I read P.G. Wodehouse, I said, oh, Douglas Adams definitely read this guy.
Yes.
Without even, having had that confirmed later. It was so incredibly obvious. And it's like, I must read all the P.G. Wodehouse I can get my mitts on, which back in the late 80s, early 90s was not as easy over here as it is now. But yeah, it was like, no, must have all of this and anything like it. So I hear where you're coming from with the appreciation of words, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about it now, my very early years was sort of in a daydream, making up stuff myself, writing my own comics. And this is really 7 or 8 year old, being a 7 or 8 year old. But after that, I can measure my life through the books I pick up and remember where I am when I read the books, when I got the books. I remember having early Doctor Who books, my first Doctor Who book in my hand. In 76, 77, Brain and Morbius was the first one. And I remember the specific books I got from the library. And I remember picking up Life, the Universe and Everything, the third book by Douglas Adams, while on holiday and reading it while on holiday. So those markers are as important to me as the friends I had and the times I had mucking about around the village and just socializing.
Sure. Absolutely. So when you actually, started writing for radio then, how do you think all of those things went into what you were doing for radio? If they did. I mean, I'm sure they did on some level, whether it was conscious or not, but
as I say, I started writing satirical comedy, not because I really wanted to do it, it's because that was where the money was.
Mm-hmm.
There was a show called Weekending, a sketch show produced by Radio 4, and that was the show you went to, and you were allowed to sit in there, whether you were a writer or not, and try and attempt to get on the show. And if you got on the show, you were paid radio rates, and if you got on the show a lot, you got commissioned. If you were commissioned a lot, the radio rate went up. It's basically the first step on the way to becoming a professional writer. So I was a satirical writer for a lot of that. I did write a play about my father. That was before Weekending. I wrote 2 plays, fringe plays. My first one was called My Grandmother Was a Time Lord, which was basically about a child and their imagination, assuming that their grandmother was a Time Lord because they're very old. There's parts of their house you never see, and it could be a TARDIS. And that was very much the early part of my life and the imagination, creating everything fantastical out of nothing. Second part was about my dad and his band, and it was called Barry's Your Man, Sing Along If You Can. And that was about my life. And it was about how bad my dad's band was, which was pretty bad pub band. It was really quite excruciating. It was ghastly band. My dad played keyboards on it, and it was a real bad pub band. And it's got loads of gigs around the area. But yeah, and so that was me tapping into my life. And the first play was tapping into my imagination, how it interacted with Doctor Who. So that's what I was doing. That was prior to Weekending. Once Weekending started, it's more of a professional job, and you kind of focus yourselves on getting the structure of sketches right, and getting and being more aware of politics and topical comedy.
So did you learn most of those structures on the job then, or was that something that you had picked up in the process of kind of getting there?
I think doing the 2 plays was extremely useful, because you don't learn how to do comedy until you write something for a live audience. and you understand if you're being too long, if the joke is too long, or things just don't pan out the way you understand. You work out what people are prepared to laugh at and what they're not prepared to laugh at. So that was an incredibly that was almost a baptism of fire for me, those plays. And I was and because of that, I was pretty confident going into Radio 4 that I knew what I was doing. And I got on the show. I tried. Week 1, I didn't get anything. On week 2, I got a line. On week 3, I got a sketch on. And after that, I didn't miss a show for the next year or so. So I think that gave me the confidence to know how to write and how to make people laugh. Yeah, it was very much that. It was very formative, those 2 plays. I learned a lot.
Sure. So how easy did you find it pulling humor out of current events and that kind of thing?
You learn that if it's not the story itself, which is pretty horrible, it's about the media's perspective on the story. It's about people's reactions to the story. You know, even in the worst kind of tragedy. I remember I was working on Dead Ringers, and I think we'd heard that Dr. David Kelly, a man in the center of a huge political row in the UK about arms to Iraq and whether the government was telling the truth over weapons of mass destruction being in Iraq. You had the similar thing in America, but we had a similar scandal over here, trying to pretend there were weapons of mass destruction and using experts as proof. And Dr. David Kelly was a guy who was providing evidence for those weapons of mass destruction, but he was being reported more strongly than his words were intended. Anyway, it was a big row, and Dead Ringers went out on the morning that he'd been found dead. He'd committed suicide, and basically it completely blew up on both sides' faces. The journalist Andrew Gilligan, who worked for Radio 4, had outed him, which you don't do with your sources, and that put pressure on him, and the government had put pressure on him to come forward and tell them what he told, to tell the world what they told him. So it was a pretty horrible situation, but we still managed to write a sketch about it in the nature of the government's response to it. And that's what you do. There's always something to be had. The magazine I write for, Private Eye, did a cover on pretty much the death of Diana, and pretty much the week of her death in the car accident, about the public's hypocrisy about it, because everyone was shouting about the press, but they buy the newspapers. Mm-hmm. Are intrusive. So there is a point to be made. There is an angle to be had. There is a joke. It's not a very funny joke, but nevertheless, it serves a purpose to illuminate as well as to make people laugh, to put a perspective on it that introduces a note of sanity in something which is pretty inexplicable at times.
Well, and that's something that comedy seems to be able to do better than anything else sometimes. You know, if you go in being very earnest or with a dramatic approach to something like that, it can come off in a way that's really off-putting that people don't hear. But if you do something like that through comedy, I think it can illuminate in a way that kind of makes people go, oh, wait, and have a deeper impression than it might have otherwise.
Oh, yes. I mean, certainly in the last 10 years with Brexit and Trump and the Ukraine war, we have tended our Radio 4 shows. This is Dead Ringers, the sketch show I'm working on currently. In case people don't know, it's another satirical sketch show. We tend to end up going out the day after or the morning after something calamitous has happened, such as the Trump election, Brexit, Boris Johnson winning an election. We tend to end up going out that morning after, and the audiences we have are pretty raw and they're pretty scratchy about it. And the relief they have that they feel from our sketches in that, no, we're not mad and we're not on our own. There are people who feel the same way. There are people, sane people like me, who have a perspective on this that's similar to mine. A lot of the humor, a lot of the laughter is laughter of relief that they are not on their own. I mean, we're not always on their side because that's the nature of satirical comedy. But sometimes when something bizarre and stupid happens, like Brexit or Donald Trump getting elected, people do need that kind of validation, if only from comedy. Because if there was no comedy in probably in some totalitarian state, then there's no outlet, and without no outlet, things don't change. That's the idea of a totalitarian state. That's why they ban humor.
Yeah. And we don't have, I mean, we have things like The Daily Show, but we don't have the same culture of radio, anything really. I mean, we have NPR, but we don't have the radio drama. We don't have radio comedy like you do in the UK. And as I'm listening to you, I'm really wishing that we did, because I can see how that would be really, really valuable, especially, as you say, in the last 10 years or so. Because if you're not into The Daily Show, there's not really anywhere to get that humorous look at things that can help you get through stuff like this.
Well, I wouldn't put yourselves down. I mean, radio is not a thing in America, I know, but I am a huge fan of the late night shows. I always listen on YouTube to Jimmy Kimmel, Seth Meyers, Stephen Colbert, occasionally Bill Maher if he's not being too annoying. And The Daily Show. So you have a good arrangement of topical comedy and satirical comedy there. And they're pretty damn good in terms of topicals. Saturday Night Live as well. Such a shame it doesn't do... Nothing happens. We do our best, and then you work your socks off trying to illuminate with comedy, and things don't go your way. Satire doesn't really change society; it just kind of nudges it occasionally.
Yeah, and you're right. I forget about the late night shows. I love those too.
They do good topical jokes, and I always try and listen to them.
Yeah. But since you mentioned Dead Ringers, I had not realized that Dead Ringers was still around. I mean, that's one that I stumbled on, unsurprisingly, about probably, 25, 30 years ago, because I stumbled on clips of John Culshaw's Tom Baker impressions. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time I heard of it. And then, every once in a while it would kind of pop up somewhere, but I hadn't realized that it was still on. So that's amazing.
We stopped. We were stopped we started in 2000 and we stopped in 2007. And most of these things with recognizable IPs get resurrected. So we started up again in 2014, and we've been going ever since, just a couple of series a year. We don't do phone calls anymore. I think John had just got exhausted and couldn't think of any more ideas, and it's quite time consuming to do. But we've just coming into our 25th year. But we had a hiatus in Doctor Who terms. We had a 7-year hiatus when we were stopped from radio. We went to TV and carried on doing the radio. That was quite a thing. We did TV for a couple of years, and then we stayed on radio, and then we were neither on TV or radio, and now we're radio.
Well, John calling Tom Baker as Tom Baker is the one that really stands out in my memory as being pretty phenomenal. Have had the nerve to do that.
John Culshaw is very brave. We started off doing Sylvester because I had Sylvester's number when you did Death Comes to Time with him, the radio online drama. So I got his number and I gave it to John and said, well, should we? And he said, yeah, we should. And after that, we kind of ran down all the other doctors and did Nicholas Courtney as well. And even while we were recording a pilot for a television show, wasn't a pilot for Ringers, but it was a very similar show to Ringers. Or was it for Ringers? John was out and about in his Tom Baker gear, and he bumped into Liz Sladen. And, of course, John completely rose to the occasion. But Liz wouldn't give us permission because she was basically just shopping. And to quote every actress, my hair's a mess, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that was quite a fortuitous thing to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame we'll never see it because I'll bet it was amazing.
Yeah, I don't know where it went, sadly.
Wow. Ugh. To have been a fly on that wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, and speaking of John Culshaw, I saw that you wrote an ad where John Culshaw was playing Ozzy Osbourne with Ozzy Osbourne.
Mm-hmm.
And I went and I found it, and I'll put a link in the show notes for folks who haven't seen it. But I'm just terribly curious how that all went. In particular, what Ozzy Osbourne thought of the idea of playing himself alongside someone else playing himself. I mean, how did that come together?
Well, that was from an advertising company, I think. It was for a product, I Can't Believe It's Not Butter.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the logic there, because I Can't Believe It's Not Butter is almost identical to butter, and you can't tell the difference. So let's do some adverts with John almost being Ozzy Osbourne and the real Ozzy Osbourne. And he roped us into it. It wasn't our idea, but he roped us into to write the advert, which was very good. And it's pretty much a closed shop, writing ads. So we were very glad to dip our toe in the advertising water. But it's not the first time or the only time they did stuff together. They did a skit for Comic Relief with John interviewing Ozzy. And that was when I met Ozzy and I met Sharon. That was a lot of fun. Sharon was very quiet and very softly spoken. I think they were both a bit nervous about going on television because Jan Ravens was being Sharon Osbourne, and Sharon Osbourne was being Sharon Osbourne, and John was being Ozzy, and Evan was being Ozzy. So it's the two couples meeting together. I can't remember what it was for either for Children in Need or Comic Relief. You would be able to track it down on YouTube, I'm sure. But yeah, that was fun. That was fun meeting Ozzy. He was quite eccentric. There was a joke I remember. He's going to prove you're Ozzy, and John was interviewing Ozzy Osbourne as Ozzy, and John's question was, "What is your name?" And Ozzy's answer joke was, "I've forgotten." And that was this is live, I think. And then John said, "What is your name?" And Ozzy leapt up onto his chair and screamed, "The Prince of Darkness." So, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, John is very good at this. He was very good at being on the hoof. We had him meeting Tony Blair for a charity thing. And they were absolute, what's the word? Shits about it, his spin team. And they basically removed our sketch that we'd written. We'd written a sketch, they'd agreed it. Then someone had leaked that he was doing it with John as Tony Blair. And then they got angry and used it as leverage. I think they probably leaked it themselves. And they used their outrage as leverage to make cuts. So there was practically no sketch left. But John squeezed as much as he could into that meeting with Tony Blair. Just all the little bits and pieces, because there was no script agreed at all, because it was basically just to meet each other. But John's very good at that. He's very good at coping with people's tantrums and people not willing to go via a script.
Yeah, I mean that kind of makes sense too, since he was out improving Tom Baker with Liz Sladen. I mean That's
No,
kind of the nature of improv.
definitely. He's a diamond. He's absolutely brilliant.
For sure. That was very clear again when I was listening to him call Tom Baker as Tom Baker. I mean, it's a special skill to be able to do that in the first place, on top of having the nerve to make that phone call.
Yeah. Tom was on his best behavior that day, and of course he did that again on television for his alter ego show, which the premise was he would dress up as the person and interview them as themselves, similar to the Ozzy Osbourne idea, but a whole show. So he met Tom as Tom, and my writing partner, I wrote a lot of jokes for that. I remember them in the pub. It's a prescient joke because John said, yes, I remember Saturday night television. I remember Saturday night television. Do you remember that evil man in the robot chair? And Tom says, who, Davros? And John says, no, Jimmy Savile. This was pre-everything. This is pre-everything to do with Jimmy Savile. Because he used to do Jim Will Fix It, and he used to have a magic chair which things used to come out of, like his Jim Will Fix It badges used to come out of the arm. So that was the joke, the evil man in the robot chair, and it turned out to be incredibly prescient.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. For U.S. listeners who don't know who that is, we found out that he was a children's TV guy, right?
He was everything. He was a DJ, and then he migrated to Saturday night television. He did children's shows and all that manner. And he was an incredibly odd man. But in those days, 1970s, the presenters were always a little bit odd, but he was pretty much the oddest. And they had a program based around his personality in which children would write in and he would make their dreams come true. And it was only after he died that everything came out, that he was a pervert and a rapist and all manner of terrible things. And that just seems to be the theme for 1970s presenters. All the terrible things come out about later. Stuart Hall was another one who did 1970s television, and Rolf Harris was practically the queen mother of television on BBC One for a long period of time. And he got into trouble and got sent to prison. So that did seem to be a running thing. There were a lot of dark secrets in 1970s television that got unearthed in the 21st century.
Yeah, for sure. But that joke, you're not kidding about.
Jimmy Savile was of a different level to all the others. He was quite an evil man.
Yeah. Boy. So since you mentioned Death Comes to Time, which was the radio show, it was 2001, right?
Yeah.
And that was your first foray into Doctor Who, and that was during the wilderness years between the TV movie and the new series starting in 2005. Had you ever had any inkling that you were going to end up doing anything Doctor Who related other than Dead Ringers? Absolutely
not. I mean, as far as I was concerned, Doctor Who was dead. I never pointed myself in that way at all because it wasn't a thing. I've always been of the philosophy that I don't write for specific things. I think that's what Robert Holmes said. If you want to be a writer, you don't say, I want to write X or Y. I just want to write. So I've gone where the money is or where the opportunities are. And there were no opportunities in Doctor Who at the time. There were the Virgin books, but I'd read a few and I had no interest in writing a Virgin's book. They weren't really my cup of tea. And Big Finish was just getting started, but not on my radar at that time. It was a complete coincidence that we were squatting in an office in Broadcasting House, the home of BBC Radio, and the next office along, someone had put up a Doctor Who Death Comes to Time logo on the door, and I found out that Dan Friedman was putting together a pilot, but he was doing it through BBC Comedy. oddly enough. I think the head of BBC Radio Comedy was a bit of an eccentric himself called John Pigeon, and he'd given it the go ahead. So I'd knocked on his door and said, "You're doing Doctor Who. Can I be your scientific advisor?" Fine. I was going to use Mike Tucker because at the time he was quite close to Sylvan Soph. But as you're in the next office, that makes sense that I should use you. So that really was my first foray, and it was by complete coincidence.
I mean, that's as good a way as any.
Yeah, absolutely. Serendipity. It's a lovely word, serendipity. Very much a happy accident.
For sure. For sure. So you just stumbled your way in there in a way. And then how long did it take to make it happen, and what all did you end up doing with it?
Well, we put together the radio pilot, the half-an-hour radio pilot, which is the first episode of Death Comes to Time. It was quite a leisurely process. We had a lot of time to sort things out. I became a little bit more than a scientific advisor. I became script editor because Dan had a lot of things that I could suggest make better, because it was a bit aimless, the first episode. It was a lot of suggestions I made to make it better. And it was put together, half-an-hour radio pilot. And of course, BBC Radio turned it down because at the time, they'd done focus groups, and they had basically decided that Radio 4 was a woman's channel because women listened to it during the day, and women didn't like science fiction or horror. That's received wisdom. So it was all cooking shows and nice dramas and Woman's Hour. So it really didn't fit in with their idea of what Radio 4 was at the time. This is completely different to what they see now as Radio 4, because they do all manner of things across the board. But at that time, it was rather a severe stricture on what you could put out on Radio 4. So it got canned. And I think BBC Online were, through James Goss and the others, were thinking of doing some Doctor Who dramas through the website, and Dan said, "I've got this ready-made episode for you." And I think they animated it and they put it out, and the reaction was staggering. I think it got about 1 million hits overnight. As far as I remember, that it was just that one, the episode that was commissioned by Radio Comedy. And because of the reaction, they asked Dan to complete it. So it was a long process. And the development of the rest of the story was a bit more fraught, and I had less to do with it. It was written in haste a lot of the time. But yeah, it did take a long time because of that was the process. It was started as a radio comedy project, just to go out on Radio 4 in the drama slot. It got turned down. It got picked up by BBC Online. It got put out by BBC Online. They got the response. They commissioned the rest of the story. And then, yeah, took a while.
Was the whole thing animated? Because I ended up listening to it on CD, so I never saw the animated version.
Yeah, it was all animated. It's kind of like very crude animation. Mm-hmm. It got developed. I think by Scream of the Schalke, they'd really got their teeth into how to animate stuff. I think that was a lot better, because after that they did Real Time, and then they did Sharda, and then they did Scream of the Schalke. So they'd done 3 or 4 after Death Comes to Time.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's been probably 12 years since I listened to Death Comes to Time. It was great stuff for a road trip. that's when I listened to it. But I just remember it being so big. You know, it felt very big. You know, and the cast being kind of unusual, with Stephen Fry making an appearance, and
John Sessions.
Yes. And I will admit that my favorite moment was when the Brigadier turns up, and I won't say anything more about that, so I won't spoil anybody. But that was definitely my very favorite moment of it. But yeah, I mean, it feels like it was so big. It probably didn't feel that way to you as much because you weren't listening to it on a road trip. But yeah, it feels like it would have been a huge undertaking, even though perhaps it wasn't.
Felt significant because it was the only thing the BBC was actually making that was Doctor Who. And on the strength of that, I got invited to a couple of conventions, one in Manchester, one in LA, because we were the only official Doctor Who product. Big Finish was Big Finish. They got the license, that's fine. But it showed that the BBC had interest in Doctor Who. Whether that belief was real or not, at the time, it probably wasn't, because it was basically BBC Online doing the things off their own bat. But I think that's what fans perceived, that the BBC was starting to make Doctor Who again. So it felt incredibly significant, and the story felt big in terms of the production. I think Dan Friedman spent hours and hours wanting to make it Wagnerian. I mean, my personal opinion is it starts off incredibly promisingly, and I think, like lots of stories that promise to be significant, they never quite match up to the promise. If you're going to say something that's going to be the biggest thing ever, then you make a sort of a false promise, really, because I think things that become the biggest thing ever aren't intended to be the biggest thing ever. And sometimes, you know, Three Doctors is amazing to me, but it looks just like I bet they didn't make it to be significant, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, it was nice to have Pat back and Bill, and it was done in much the same way as any other story in that season, but the significance only comes later to it.
Sure. And
the freewheeling, humorous nature of the Three Doctors is what makes it special, not the fact that it says this is special, unlike a lot of the latter anniversary things that kind of project their importance before they even are broadcast. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think when you set out to make a big thing, it's easy to get stuck in the scale of it has to be a big thing, you know, whereas, like you say, you know, when I interviewed Katie Manning at Long Island Who a couple years ago, and, you know, I said, did you have any clue when you were making the Three Doctors? She said, God, no. You know, we were just making the episode, and that was it. And so it was not the big thing that we look at it as now, because it was just, okay, here we are, and we've got Pat Troughton and Bill Hartnell back, and we're just doing what we do every week like normal, and they just happen to be here, and this is what we're doing this week.
Yeah.
So
I say Deadly Assassin was just another story to slot in the series. Genesis of the Daleks was just another story to slot in the series. I know they were on to a good thing. I thought Terry Nation was enjoying writing it, and I'm sure David Maloney was going to have fun directing it. But the significance of it, and the significance of Deadly Assassin, I suppose there was some thought about that. But I don't think Robert Holmes was worried about that. He was just writing what he enjoyed. Contrast that with the Ultimate Foe, which is meant to be the biggest thing ever in terms of Doctor Who. It's compromised, and so there's a little bit of a so what at the end, because there was an effort to make it the biggest thing ever, but a few things didn't pan out. So that's the danger of saying, bringing out the loudspeaker and saying the megaphone and saying, this is going to be amazing, this is going to be significant.
Yeah, and I think that's the trap when you get into something where you have been around for so long that you have 50th anniversaries and 60th anniversaries, because the numbers themselves are so big. Yes. that you get trapped by, it has to be big because it's big, you know, and then it's very hard to deliver anything that can actually live up to that, because what are you going to do? Which I think was actually what made doing 3 specials for the 60th smarter than trying to do one enormous thing. You know, whether you think that worked or not, I think it was still probably smarter than, we're going to do a huge thing.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think it made sense to dodge that cliche of doing lots of doctors and the big meetup, because the surprise is not there.
Hmm.
It's always a problem. With every franchise. What do you do to make a significant story in the Marvel universe now? What do? You can't, because you've not got any groundwork there.
Yeah.
You can't make an artificial significant story and pluck it out of nothing unless you have an idea. Unless you have a good idea and a good story, it doesn't work.
Right. And I don't think you can force a story to be a good story. Like you're saying, you know, letting a good writer just play around with what's interesting to them in the moment is probably a better way to get a good story than to say, we've got to write a really good story right now.
Yeah.
Putting those big expectations on it makes it a lot harder to turn something like that out than just, oh, go have fun with this idea.
Mm.
Yeah. So, I think, the three special idea, some people liked it, some people hated it, but it was different. It gave you three things instead of one. Your odds of liking at least one of them were pretty good.
Never
And
even thought of it as a
yeah,
special in some ways. It's just Doctor Who is back kind of thing. It was, yeah, the novelty was there simply by it being there and not being there, because there was an expectation there was going to be nothing after Jodie. So that was the novelty. The 60th anniversaries, the message of the 60th anniversary is it's still going, and there is more life to it. That was the celebration.
yeah, yeah. And I think fans tend not to appreciate that too. We think that there's always got to be something, even though we lived through the period of there was nothing. Well, some of us did. Newer fans didn't, but
Yeah, yeah. It's a surprise now, isn't it? But people get used to everything.
hmm.
They get used to Doctor Who not being there, and they get used to just Doctor Who just being there. And yeah, I think they do assume it's going to just carry on, and it can withstand all their rage.
Yeah, yeah, for real. There's too much of that too. Since we mentioned Big Finish, you've written for Big Finish. And, you've also written novels now. And I'm curious to know, like, going back and forth between forms and formats and, playing in other people's sandboxes and playing in your own sandboxes. How does that go for you? What do you like about that? What's new and different?
Well, I like the different disciplines for each medium. When I write for a particular medium, I try to make it work specifically for that medium, and that is the exercise. When I did Omega, which was the first Big Finish story I did, I wanted to make it a story that only worked on radio, as it's an audio story. I wanted to make it specific to that. Someone had billed another Big Finish that had come out a couple of years earlier as this story could only work on audio, and I listened to it and I thought, no, you can. It can work on audio. It's just particularly gruesome in terms of visuals you are suggesting. So I wanted to do something which absolutely could not work on television, and that is the discipline I always have. When we transitioned from Dead Ringers from radio to television, we made it a mark of achievement to write a sketch that would work only on television, and that we worked very hard on making more visuals to each sketch. So yeah, my novels are very novelly. My my radio plays are very radio-y, and my television work is very television-y. Those are the disciplines, and there's a piece of everything I write for Big Finish. There is an element of radio that's there. I go on to doing the Kingmaker, which makes a huge play of an identity of a particular character. I think if you saw that character visually, and you go, that's not the character that you're suggesting it is, but the fact that there is no visual component helps.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another instant involving a piece coming off a person, and you don't see what piece it is, and then it's talked about in episode 4, and then you realize what that piece is. But if it was television, you wouldn't be able to do it. And I can go through every one of my radio plays in order, and there is some kind of component that is only works in terms of sound. And with my books, with my novels, I write them very booky. I wrote a book called Painkiller, which is pretty much first person, about a woman who suffers from chronic neuropathic pain. And she's been in pain for about 10 years. And she finds her own suicide note in a drawer, and she can't remember writing it herself. And it's that kind of intimacy you get with a written story in book form that you can't get with a play visually or on radio. So, yeah, I mean, when you buy a Nev Fountain book, you get a book. When you listen to a Nev Fountain radio play, you get a radio play. It's not a television play with the numbers hacked off.
That's so interesting, because I don't think most people stop and think about it that way. But I think that's, you're really taking advantage of what the medium can do in ways that most people don't necessarily think about. I mean, I've written a novel, and I never stopped to think about what can I do with this medium that I couldn't do in another one. And that's probably because I haven't played around in the other ones. But, I don't know how much most people would stop and say, what can I do because this is radio that I couldn't do on TV to make this work in a particular way. I think that's really cool.
I do love writers who play with form. I like Pirandello, who wrote 6 Characters in Search of an Author, which is about the nature of characterization on stage. Are these characters, or are these representations of the characters? Are they aware they are characters? And that was very appealing to me in university. And Agatha Christie, who played around with the form of the novel and wrote books like The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which played around with writing and played around with the form of the murder mystery. I love as well as the radio television thing, I love undermining the conventions of what you are in. The Kingmaker, for example, I made everyone assume it was a story about the Master, because that's what your Doctor Who brain falls into. So, there are cliches which writers fall into. And the fun thing is throwing up those cliches, and in fact, they mean something completely different, these cliches. And that's the best way to fool people. And when you write as many murder mysteries as I do, it's very important to fool people. With my the book that's currently out, The Fan Who Knew Too Much, which is about a bunch of science fiction fans who decide to solve a murder which they think they've worked out it happened in the 1980s on a television show that they're very interested in. They're fans of a science fiction show called Victims from the Void. They decide to pitch a Blu-ray documentary to the BBC so they can bring all the actors back to the same place where they filmed it on location and work out who did the murder. The play's The Thing were in They'll Catch the Conscience of the King. So they get them to reenact scenes from the original science fiction series to see if they can work out who murdered this person back in the 80s, this extra from the show. But what I'm doing is something completely different. That is what I do. That is what a lot of people said. You think you're reading one type of book, but you're actually reading a completely different type of book. And that's the best way to fool people. And you think you're listening to a certain type of Doctor Who convention, and you're not all. It's tremendous fun. It really keeps me interested in writing that kind of thing.
I was going to say, you must have a great time putting these things together.
Well, they say that to comedians all the time. You must have great fun writing this. Not always. The Kingmaker was a bit of a slog because it was a very difficult premise to actually sort out correctly. It took me ages. It was a real horrible thing to write. But most of the time, I am enjoying it very much. You enjoy the process of creation. You enjoy putting things together and making them work. The act of writing is a creative process. I can't just write a synopsis and follow that synopsis to the letter. There's something wrong with you if you just do that. Because everything is creative. You write a scene in a book, and there are ways things happen. Characters go in different directions. New ideas turn up. The process of writing creates ideas. So it turns out much better than you hope it is, usually.
Yeah. That's always been my experience. And I know when I've worked with writers and their characters suddenly do something they didn't expect for the first time, it always freaks them out. And I'm like, no, that's when you know it's working. Keep going.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. They usually think they've lost their minds. I'm like, no. That's when the magic's happening.
In this book here, does it go backwards? Yes, it goes backwards. And that's that's the one that's currently out. That's very much like Omega, my first big finish, in which the process of writing actually threw up one of the biggest twists. As I started Omega as a pretty conventional story, I knew I wanted to write it in a radio way, but it was a pretty conventional story. In the act of writing the synopsis and watching Arc of Infinity, suddenly realized what I could do and make it into a really special radio-specific, audio-specific story. But it wasn't there when I decided to start writing it. It wasn't there at all. And with this book, The Fan Who Knew Too Much, I had an ending all planned. And I went on holiday to Turkey with my lady, and I just suddenly realized, oh, yes, that's the proper ending to the story, and completely changed the nature of the book, which I had written and submitted. And just by adding and just by having that revelation, thinking about what you're writing, it made it 3 times better. 3 times better, at least 3 times better. I love the ending to this book. I love the end. I love the twist in Omega. I love all these things, but it only comes out through the actual creative process. Only comes out. You can't just write a synopsis and go, that's it. That's my book. That's my play. And I will start writing it now from there to there. With the book, you normally have a starting point and a place you want to get to, and everything in the middle is up for grabs. For this occasion, I realized the ending was up for grabs as well, but I didn't realize it.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great story. So, well, I love this conversation too, especially everything you've said in the last couple of minutes about how all this works, because I think that is true. I think you really don't know what you're dealing with in any creative situation until you're in it. And I think that's when you really learn about it and about yourself and about, how your whole process works and, how it needs to come together is often not nearly as much in your control as you think, especially when you start out. And then when that spark hits and it all starts to come together is when
it is simple,
really cool.
Physics, biology. You think a lot more about the thing you're doing while you're writing than before writing. Mm-hmm. That's just the nature of it. I'm writing a book now. I'm on 40,000 words, and I spent much longer in the process of writing than I did about the planning of the book. So it's only natural that more ideas will come up during the writing of the book than there is the planning of the book.
Yes. Makes perfect sense. So I think you're right. Anybody who sits down, especially for the first time, saying, I'm going to write a book and it's going to be about this and this and this and this, and it's going to be easy because this is what I'm going to write, is probably in for a big surprise. And if they're not, then something hasn't gone quite right. Something has seriously gone awry. Yeah. I mean, I know that some writers can work like that. I think they're in the minority. Yeah. I agree. I am largely a fly by the seat of your pants kind of writer myself, and I can't imagine trying to stick to an outline religiously. It would make me crazy.
There is a thing, there can be a germ inside the book that you need to stick to, a premise that you've got to, that you're enjoying, the premise that you've got to produce by the end of the book. But everything around that is just jam. You can play around with it and have more fun if you know the book you're writing and the premise and the trick that you've got in the middle. You can write around it and make it more special. Like with the twist in Omega, once I'd worked out the twist in Omega or the twist in Kingmaker, I could have a lot more fun playing with the audience's expectations of what's going to happen before I spring the twist on them. You can lay it on a bit thicker. You can push them in a completely different way because you know there's a twist coming. And that's great fun leading people off in all manner of directions. You can have lots of fun and you can really twist the twist. You can really ratchet up. You can put everything around it and give them even more and more clues, which they'll never, ever get. And once the twist has happened, they go, I wish I want to read this book again. I want to listen to this play again because I've missed so much. The nature of this book is completely different to me. I have to read it again, knowing what I know now.
Right.
That's what I aim for. And a lot of people say, I've done that with your book. I've gone back and I've read it again because I want to read it knowing this thing.
Right. Now I want to see how all the pieces fall together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm going to enjoy it reading in that way now.
Yes. Yeah. It's always fun to be surprised the first time and then to go back and figure out how it all came together.
I mean, I'm sure people have read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd again. I'm sure I've read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd knowing what's going to happen to it. Have you?
I haven't read that one, so I can't speak to it, but now I will. I mean, not knowing what's going to happen, but I'll probably read it multiple times.
Yeah, if you don't know what's going to happen, it's great. If you know what's going to happen, it's also great. It's like watching The Sixth Sense over again. People will not say, oh, well, I've seen The Sixth Sense. I know what's going to happen in The Sixth Sense. I have no interest in watching it again. I think that's just mad. You watch it again because you're going to enjoy the camera tricks, the lines, the directorial flourishes that make the twist work.
Right.
Enjoy that with the knowledge in your head what's going to happen.
Yeah. There's no reason you can't do both. You only get the first time once, but then you can have the second time.
We do have a phrase in this country, I could eat that again after a really good meal, which doesn't sound very savory, but you get the point.
Yes.
You get what they mean.
Absolutely. And I hope that this conversation will encourage people to do that and to think about, how did this come together to have this effect? And let's go back and see if we can figure it out, because I think that adds to the fun of that experience.
It's like music. You listen to a song over and over again because you're waiting for that bit in A Day in the Life where it goes from the crescendo to Paul McCartney singing. That moment, the moments in A Day in the Life, and a good piece of music, a good piece of classical music, you are looking forward to it, that bit.
Yes.
You know it's coming, so, there's no surprise, but you are enjoying the ride.
Yes. Most definitely. And I think that's what life is about. It's about enjoying the ride with all of these things.
Enjoying the ride.
Yeah. Well, I have enjoyed this ride very much. Well, and I really appreciate you coming and having this conversation with me.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm enjoying the ride.
Excellent. That's this week's episode. Thanks so much to Nev Fountain and to you. Nev's links are in the show notes, and his new book, Lies and Dolls, is out now. I hope you'll leave a review for this episode. There is a link right in your podcast app, and it is super easy and really, really makes a difference. If you enjoyed our conversation, please do share it with a friend. Thanks so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.